the next part. And so I'm so thrilled to welcome two beautiful people, Marilyn Hamilton and Lorraine Rytz. Both are based at Findhorn, the Eco-community in Scotland. And I'm sure most people have heard of Findhorn. We just got to spotlight Marilyn, if maybe could wait. Oh, there's Marilyn and there's Lorraine. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I have been so blessed by being invited over the recent year to be part of the virtual gathering of meditations at Findhorn. Findhorn is on a sacred line. It's a sacred spot where many hundreds of people reside. So before we move into Findhorn, if I could introduce Marilyn to start with. Marilyn has, Dr. Marilyn Hamilton has become a friend. I'm so thrilled to call you a friend, Marilyn, who's been gracious enough to support a project that we're running in our hometown of Nottingham, an Integral City project. And Marilyn is the founder of Integral City, and more details will be put into the chat so that you can find Marilyn. And Marilyn runs Islands of Calm, a meditation on a Saturday morning where we link in and bring more calm, more peace into the world. Whilst I trained with Marilyn recently, I was blessed to meet Lorraine. And Lorraine is based in Findhorn and is listener convener for the new Findhorn Association. Findhorn has been through a very difficult time, like many of us with COVID, but more has happened to Findhorn, to the community over the recent weeks. And the topic for discussion between Marilyn and Lorraine is titled Regenerating Community from Trauma and Shock. So it's with the greatest of delight and much gratitude that I pass over to Marilyn and Lorraine to talk a little bit about Findhorn and what's occurring there in terms of regeneration from trauma and shock and healing within your community. So thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Sue. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. And thank you for Jackie and Claire and Dan warming us up here. I have to acknowledge that if Dan is speaking from the 7th generation, that is what the Indigenous communities also wish, that all their decisions be made unto the 7th generation. As Sue said, Lorraine and I are both located in the Findhorn Eco-village in Scotland. And we're 58 years old, so not quite 7 generations. But as the mothership, I would say, of the eco-villages of the UK for sure, if not for much of the rest of the world, there's certain core beliefs and principles that were formed at the beginning of the Findhorn Eco-village that has really helped us through this very traumatic and unexpected happenings of the last year. I just want to share those principles to start with, because I think it will help you to see why the guidance that comes from Findhorn is so widespread. Hundreds and thousands of people have taken courses at Findhorn, and when they're usually taking a course that we call the Experience Week, they would learn these principles as they were working in the park garden or serving in the kitchen or doing home care. So very simple kinds of tasks, but what they carried in their heart, first of all, was work is love in action. And there was also the second, which is deep inner listening. So we always listen deeply to ourselves and to one another. And we also connect with the third principle, which is co-creating with the intelligences of nature. So those 3 principles have been a founding ethos of Findhorn And so many people carry those. And they sound like the great wisdom, I think, of Mother Earth, because we're certainly having the experience here of having not only co-created and collaborated to what has become this eco-village, but we started from just a caravan park on the dunes. And now if you came here, you would find a beautiful village with many different neighborhoods with very distinctive buildings in them. And you would find trees that are now over 50 years old. And I always think it's like living in an aviary, because the birds are so tame here. They're always flying past, doing low swoops and singing their hearts out. So in this last year, which we started by being confronted with a pandemic, and we didn't exactly have that on our strategy, that in an eco-village that's not only one that people are looking for the ecology and the permaculture of how to grow and live well, but the spiritual guidance that we brought, not only through those 3 principles, but through the many courses that were offered here. So in the first lockdown of the pandemic a year ago, what happened was this community lost over 80% of its economy. That meant the doors were closed to the guests who normally come and visit here. And that was a huge shock, because we not only had the Findhorn Foundation, we had the Findhorn College, of which I'm a trustee, and we had many, many organizations and businesses that depended on everything from bed and breakfast to providing fresh produce to also offering supplementary programs. So our whole economy was basically put into lockdown. And this meant that we had to look at each other and find, could we locate in those 3 principles a way of moving forward? As Sue introduced Lorraine, Lorraine plays a very special role in Findhorn because she's leading the new Findhorn Association. And as she's a listener convener, a title whose rhyme and name and meaning I've always thought was very inspirational. And so I would like to just invite Lorraine to come into the conversation and tell us what happened in your own heart, mind, when you realized what the lockdown would mean to our community, Lorraine.
Great. Thank you, Marilyn. And thank you, Sue, for the invitation to be here with you and your lovely, amazing team to pull all this together. As listener convener, I have a two-page job description, but the way I understand it is that I look to the needs, the concerns, the desires of the community, and it's an elected position. I'm hired by the NFA Association, and I work with a voluntary elected council of 8 wonderful people this year. And the response for us was rather informal, surprisingly informal. Rather than working within our existing structures, we just immediately, almost organically, gathered together individuals from leadership circles, not specifically to represent their organization, but to represent a different voice that is existing in the community. And Marilyn herself was also invited onto our COVID action group. And we looked very quickly to the logistics. That was our first level of response, and looking to see what had to be changed, what had to be adhered to, complied to with all the lockdown restrictions, and what would that mean to different sectors? What would that mean to the families with small children? What would that mean to the elderly and to those who were vulnerable from perhaps medical conditions? And we just had to look to all the very different areas and sectors of the community to see how could we hold and hear what their needs were. And very quickly we started to understand that it would continue to change, that we wouldn't know everything up front. I don't know any of us that have actually living through and having to deal with a pandemic. So it was brand new territory for us. So the COVID Action Group started to deal with many of the details. And one of the groups that formed at that particular time was a volunteer action group. And that was very specific to helping people to do the grocery shopping or picking up medications or helping with the creating a bit of mobility at a time when everyone was meant to stay home and stay indoors. And if you remember back to the first part of the year. So, and we found that what happened there, that neighborhood hubs were created almost again organically. We had a sense of, we live together in this cluster. We'll, just keep in touch with one another and see what the needs are and see what needs to happen. So the care, the compassion that rose up in everyone was remarkable, really remarkable. One of the most beautiful aspects of what happened with using creativity to respond to this was our town criers. And we have a wonderful, an artist, a brilliant woman, Laura Passetti. And we discussed the, the idea in the volunteer action group that we needed to communicate information, and how could we do it in a more loving, and it turned out to be a very entertaining way. So there was a group of people that came forth and totally gowned themselves with red noses and floppy hats and bicycles all done up with flowers, and adhering to all the rules of the lockdown conditions. But they were able to go from neighborhood to neighborhood and to deliver the messages. And the one prevailing message that continued through the many months of those deliveries was, let yourself be infected with love. So it's kind of like risen up as a motto now for our community at the time being. Okay, back to you, Marilyn.
Yeah, let yourself be infected by love. I have spread that message around as far as I could because it was such a positive infection. And I still look forward on Friday afternoons for them coming around. And so this was a way of expanding beyond the screens that we all started to tuck ourselves behind and get out. And as Lorraine said, have these neighborhood hub gatherings. So there was also, when we gathered in our COVID action group, we were doing all the logical things. And one of the traditions at Findhorn is in our spiritual community, we call on subtle activism. We call on the unseen beings, the invisible world, to support us. And so it was a question I asked in one of our meetings, why were we not integrating this into our strategy? And Lorraine and the others all just looked at me and said, well, I guess that sounds like a good idea. When are you going to start it? And so not too shortly afterwards, on Saturday mornings, we started this Islands of Calm meditation that Sue also mentioned. And as Sue and I had come to know each other through the Nottingham project, she asked if she could come and join us. So not only is it in Findhorn now, the Islands of Calm meditation, but there's others that we've rippled out and included in it. Now, the Islands of Calm meditation was inspired by David Spangler and Mary Inglis, who said that if you could find the island of calm in yourself, then you had an opportunity to impact up to 1,000 other people. And I thought that sounded like a wonderful ratio. And I thought that the help of noticing that the work or the opportunity was to find the calm in yourself, just as we've already been led in these meditations today, when you open your heart to the possibility of calmness, and you invite in the allies from the angelic realms, or from the she, or from the elementals, or from the four directions, then you actually realize you're not alone. And so any turbulence that you might encounter, you have a sense that you can just ground yourself, feet on the ground, and connect to source, and feel that you also, as Sue referred to, you become an energetic line yourself, from the calmness of source to the calmness of Mother Earth. So our Islands of Calm also became something that interleaved with another practice that we had before the lockdown. In Findhorn, we had 2 occasions to sing Taizé. One was all during the week. We would sing Taizé in the nature sanctuary or in Cluny. And on Sundays, we would have a special long Taizé where we would do sacred dancing in the Universal Hall. So it was a great shock when we were denied access to both those locations and told we couldn't sing. We couldn't sing. This was really a heartbreak. And as many of you might know, that actually did prove that was one of the transmissions for COVID. So singing is still restricted in most places. However, when you want to sing, the heart finds a way. And so one of our Taizé leaders created a Zoom Taizé that we have on Tuesdays and Thursdays and Sundays. So any of you would be welcome to join us. And we sing on Zoom now. We had to figure out, because Zoom has a little sound delay, that we actually had to turn off our mics when we were singing together. And we bring over hundreds of people together now. And from around the world. So we have a very large group of people from Japan, as well as Europe and the UK and North America. And they're all gathering, oftentimes at times that would not be when we would usually hold Taizé here in Scotland. But that is sort of the call of the open heart and the expression and joy of singing together. So we listen to the music and sing, as I do, our little hearts out on our own, and we can see all of us singing in our individual Zoom box. And at the end of the day or on Sundays, sometimes we have live music that is played. We had a harp this morning and a guitar. And we read poems. We read the traditional Eileen's Guidance, and we read poems that are often freshly minted and some from our resident poets. Some of you might know of Oriole. So there you have other ways that we found during the last year of staying together, staying connected, keeping our hearts open. And Lorraine, who I met very shortly after coming to Findhorn, because we're actually originally both Canadians, has a special passion for creativity and mosaics. And I wanted Lorraine to tell the story of the phoenix, and we had no idea how symbolic a phoenix rising would be. But tell us about the project of the phoenix, Lorraine.
Yeah, it's really a story of synchronicity. It's quite amazing. So the Phoenix Mosaic Project is an actual terrace that was created around almost a good 1/3 of our Universal Hall. It's in front of the cafe and sweeps all the way around to one of the major side entrances. There had been plans to have a terrace created in that area many years ago, and had been delayed and couldn't be got to. But one of our dear elders, Caroline Shaw, who was the project manager during the building of the hall, then came forward and said, well, it's time we do this now. And despite COVID and lockdown and all these other layers of complication, we actually called the community together, had teams of installers, and creating this magnificent mosaic. And you can actually see it if you go to the foundation websites, and you'll see these magnificent forms of a meter and a half just all over this entire area, starting with the head of the phoenix, swooping down to its beautiful wings, and then the body, and then these magnificent tail feathers. And very symbolic. There's many stories about this particular mosaic. The significance of the timing is that little did we know what the universe had in store for us. And as we did this wonderful a clay tile mosaic, creating the phoenix, and we always link that to rising from the ashes. Some months later, we actually had ashes that we're having to deal with now. And one of the beautiful art pieces that we lost was a firebird that was a stained glass panel And so people now are making a sentimental relationship between the phoenix having been recreated as a mosaic and the firebird also having a phoenix element or a fire element. When we just heard as well that that panel can actually been replaced. So it's another wonderful synchronicity that, oh yes, the plans just happen to still be on hand.
Yeah, thanks, Lorraine. And I just want to bring our conversation to a close and refer more specifically to the fires you just mentioned. So we survived this last year with bringing our community as close together as we could keep. And just as we were coming out of this lockdown, then we had two fires. One on the same night, we lost our community center and we lost our sanctuary. And unfortunately, we learned that it was an arsonist. It was somebody from the community, and that called us even to a deeper level of compassion and understanding and holding one another. And as Lorraine said, out of those ashes, we had already created this fantastic mosaic. And now that is giving us the symbols of what it is that we're in the next stage of creating and reinventing our community, because those two buildings were the physical heart, if you want, where we would gather for our cultural connections in the CC and eat together, and our spiritual heart in the sanctuary, where we held meditations all day, every day. So now, Lorraine, I just would like to say the last thing I would offer that I feel has been powerful for this whole year in how we've survived the trauma and the shocks is that we've actually lived what I call the master code of care. We've learned how to care for ourselves, for each other, for our place, and through that for the planet. And Lorraine, what would you like to say as your last words, and then we can hand it back to Sue.
I think I want to emphasize the synchronicity of there's a bigger plan. There's an absolutely bigger plan that's being orchestrated. And as we tended to the daily needs of the needs of the community, putting things in place and structures, and through the lockdown, we learned how to hold things like Teze when we could not access the buildings, and now the buildings are gone, but we're still having Teze. So that's, just one example. And just the inpouring that came from our global family, our extended community members. And it's just been really, really tremendous. And just asking you to continue to hold us in your prayers and in your hearts, because we do have a lot of trauma to be dealing with. And we're setting up again a response to being able to offer different types of programs and processes and holdings for the trauma that many, many people are experiencing. So it's still for us very early days. And thank you for keeping us in your care and your consciousness and in your hearts. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorraine. So thank you, Sue, for the invitation for us to share the regenerativity of the Findhorn Eco-Village and spiritual community.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Marilyn and Lorraine. And the messages that you're sending through is one of